History's strange, it's alien, and it won't give us what we would like to have.
So most of you know I've been talking about going through Homer this year, specifically the Iliad, and eventually I'll get to the Odyssey. It hasn't gone as smoothly as I had hoped that it would go. I'm just going to tell you that. The Homeric versions are translations, of course, and some of the translations are difficult, and some of them are better than others, and the likes of that, but I followed along as best I could. But then I discovered Stephen Fry's version. Stephen Fry, of course, the famous comedian, actor, and now author, who has reimagined the Greek myths from the beginning all the way through. He'll be releasing the book The Odyssey this coming week, and so I'm looking forward to that as a parallel when I go through the Odyssey starting in the next week. As I wrapped up the Iliad and the story of Troy and leading into the Aeneid and those kinds of things, almost simultaneously with getting ready for the Liberty 250 celebration, there were a lot of lessons that really strike home. The reason they strike home, of course, is because there is a certain level of understanding that the founders of this country had with Greek mythology and their understanding of those things and how that impacted their history. And that's something that we need to keep in mind. It's something that we need to keep in the forefront of what we're thinking. What we simply dismiss as mythology, the founders of this country and the later framers of the Constitution held as history. Does that mean they were stupid or uneducated or whatever? No. It meant that they had a different view of things that I think in some ways we've lost. And that's to our detriment because they understand things differently than we understood them. In the Iliad and in the story of Troy, we are presented with a lot of lessons. And it wasn't until the final pages of the book that it was actually in the appendix of the book that I came across. No, it wasn't the appendix, it was the final chapter. There's a statement that's made by Odysseus, who says, he's talking to Agamemnon, he's talking about some of the things that they're going to have to do. And he makes the statement that sometimes what the gods have written, man has to rewrite. That's a very profound kind of thinking, and it's a very profound kind of thing to think about. And when you put it into terms of the American Revolution, the Declaration of Independence, the ideas of liberty, you're dealing with the same kind of thinking. What God had written, sometimes man has to rewrite. Believe me, the kings, like King George III, Louis XIII and XIV, believed in this something called the divine right of kings. They believed that God put them on the throne, and that therefore anything that opposed them was against the will of God. And so sometimes what God had written had to be rewritten. And I wonder if maybe Jefferson, Adams, Franklin kind of reached back into the story of the Iliad and took that idea and said, hey, look, sometimes we got to rewrite these things. There's another lesson from the Odyssey, from the Iliad, that I want to make sure that we get. And while there's lots of them, I've actually written a piece that has the 7 things that I learned. But of that piece, number 5 is very simply this. Flawed heroes make for real lessons. The Greeks gave us gods who had tempers, heroes with tragic flaws, stories that shimmer with both greatness and grief. And in the story of Troy, we see those stories not whitewashed, not covered over. They're none of that. We see these stories for what they really, really are. And we see these characters as the flawed people that they really are, from Agamemnon's hubris in the early part to Achilles' rage, to Odysseus' trickery, to Helen's fickleness, to Hector's inability to see the future. They're all mighty characters, but they're impulsive. They're proud. They're deceitful. They're doomed. And the grandeur lies not in their perfection, but in their persistence of their goals and their moral tension rather than their moral clarity. As we step into this Liberty 250 series, heading into the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, we're going to be talking a lot about our own heroes. People like, Franklin, Adams, Jefferson, Washington. And we need to take that same approach with them that Homer and others have taken with the heroes of the Iliad and the Odyssey. And that is that they are not perfect, not by a long shot. Jefferson, who will write the words, "All men are created equal." You know the problems with Jefferson writing that. Does it take anything away from the words? I don't think it does. And in some ways, it makes them more powerful because they were written by a man who enslaved 600 people. Benjamin Franklin, brilliant, bold. But he struggled his entire life with personal failings and shifting loyalties. He lost his son. He never saw his son again because of the revolution. Alexander Hamilton, who will go on to become the architect of our financial stability. Boy, if we'd have had modern tabloids in his era, they would have blushed at some of the things that he was involved with. Adams, John Adams, the conscience of the revolution. He was much like, in many ways, Agamemnon. He's stubborn, he's vain, he's self-destructive politically. And even George Washington, the indispensable man, owned human beings and struggled with it only after the war had been won. And yet, these same men, these imperfect men, founded and created something that changed the world. And how do we square that in our own minds? How do we celebrate these flawed people without stepping into idolatry or self-demolition of them as well? I think we do it the same way we read the Iliad. We understand that there are lessons here. In the book, Stephen Fry's book, Troy, he writes in the appendix these words: "It's the broken ones, the broken men, who make the best legends. Whole men, perfect men, are utterly forgettable because there's no conflict, there's no tension. It's not a celebration of failure. It's an admission that virtue does not require perfection, that great things can be born from the imperfect. The Declaration of Independence was not written by saints. It was written by sinners who had a vision of a better world. And like Achilles, who finally chooses to fight, or Hector choosing to stand, these men will make choices that will matter at great personal cost. We do not honor them by pretending that they're flawless, and I hope we don't do that. We honor them by wrestling ourselves with their own contradictions, much as we do in the Iliad, and building on what they dared to begin. We learn the lessons of Homer from Homer. We learn how beauty destroys, how war turns us into animals. We learn that hubris is dangerous. And we take those lessons and we begin to build on what they dared to begin. So as we head into Dave Does History, Liberty 250, let's not reach for statues. Let's reach for stories. Not to cleanse or cancel the past. That's not what we're going to do, but we're going to try to understand it as it truly was. Because history, like myth, survives not because it is pristine and perfect, but because it is powerful.
Check out more stories from history at davedoeshistory.org.